Morrison from Square Books. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Just a few house cleaning items. We have some upcoming events. Got a really busy week next week, so I wanted to let y'all know what's going on. And of course, you can always check our website at squarebooks.com for upcoming events and lots of other good stuff. But next Monday, October 12th at noon, John Grisham has a new book, A Time for Mercy, which is a sequel to A Time to Kill. And at noon on Zoom, he'll be in conversation with Richard Howarth. That's Monday, October 12th. For all these events, you can get on our website and RSVP at squarebooks.com. And then on Tuesday, October 13th, we have a young adult event with Mara Fitzgerald and her book, Beyond the Ruby Veil. She'll be in conversation with Nina Varello. And then Wednesday, October 14th, we have David Levitt with his new novel, Shelter in Place. That's at 5 p.m., as is the Mara Fitzgerald event. And then Thursday, October 13th, as part of our Crossroads book group discussion series, we will have Connor Town O'Neill, who's the author of Down Along with That Devil's Bones, and he'll be in conversation with faculty member Brian Foster, who actually has a forthcoming book due out in December called I Don't Like the Blues, so that should be very interesting. And that's Thursday, October 15th at 5 p.m. But tonight, we're here for Pete Beatty and his wonderful debut novel, Cuyahoga, and we are very fortunate to have succeeded in getting our good friend Kathy Belden to be in conversation with Pete. One of the great things about being in the book business is establishing relationships with publishers and publicists and editors. And Kathy Belden has been a longtime friend of the store. She actually sent me Pete's very early bound manuscript of Pete's book. I always look forward to getting little packages from Kathy here and there. She's been in the publishing business for over 30 years, formerly with Bloomsbury, and currently an executive editor with Simon & Schuster. You can see some of her wonderful books up here. She's edited Mitchell Jackson, Roz Chast, Robert Gordon, Sarah Smarsh, and a couple of great Mississippi writers, Kiesi Lehman and Jesmyn Ward. So we're very excited to have Kathy in conversation with Pete. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Kathy to introduce Pete, and we look forward to y'all's conversation. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Cody.
Thank you.
So first, thank you to Square Books, to all involved in the event, and to all who make it one of my favorite bookstores in the country. So I have known Pete for 15 years, I think, but I'm never right on that math. And I can say, I never imagined this would be an experience we would share. This isn't to say that I didn't imagine great things for Pete. I did. Pete and I met when he took a job at Bloomsbury as a young editor. Pete was a great colleague, not only because he was good at his job, but he was good company. He was funny, indignant at the right moments. He had some not so latent anti-corporate feelings. He was eloquent on most topics. Pete's big brain, as I characterize it, was always impressive, from his knowledge and love of history, which this book demonstrates, and his own corner of popular culture, sports, and literature, all of which are sewn into this book as well. Beyond this, Pete is generous. He's humble, and the size of his heart corresponds with his brain. Writer Mitchell Jackson describes the book as impressing upon my head and heart, twin joys. The book reflects the person. Those years ago, when Pete and I worked together, I thought Pete was bound for better things. I thought he would get his PhD. I thought he'd be a professor of literature or history. What I didn't know then is that Pete is an artist. And as I read this book for the first time last December, which felt like a very dark time, little did we know how dark it would get, my mood was elevated. Not only was I so happy to see what my beloved former colleague had hiding inside of him, but I felt nourished by the beauty and the artfulness and humor and depth of feeling Cuyahoga revealed to me. Over the years, I've read a lot of manuscripts written by relatives and friends of relatives, and the outcome has never been like this. Pete has written a novel described by Bill Cusimano at Square Books as distinct and deft, and in his first glowing review in the LA Times as funny, a funny rambunctious debut and a hoot of a tale, told in the style the reviewer characterizes as modified Huck, with a mytho-rustic tone that is its own pleasure. The review went on to compare Pete to George Saunders for his limber satire, and with other Ohio-bred writers, Toni Morrison, Donald Ray Pollock, and in another review, he was compared to Thomas Pynchon. So I'd say we're off to a pretty good start. I envy those of you who haven't read this book yet. The fresh Beatty experience is a good one. I am in the midst of reading it for the 4th or 5th time, and I honestly can't believe how exciting it is yet again. I see out there in Zoomland, there are former colleagues and friends. I see some Beattys. I bet Pete's parents and sister might well be here, and his wife, Anna. I know we all want to join together to celebrate Pete, so I will applaud him now on behalf of those of you muted by Zoom. And we will start with Pete giving us a quick understanding of what the novel's about and a short reading.
Thank you, Kathy. That really kind of melted my heart. So we could just stop there. Everybody can go get dinner, and I'll just take the good feeling and take a nap with it. But thank you, Kathy and Scribner, everyone at Scribner, and everyone at Square Books, which is really just a wonderful, wonderful bookstore. I think a lot of people who I know in my life have never been to Oxford, Mississippi, and you're missing out. It's worth the trip for Square Books alone. So thank you, Sammy. Thank you, Cody. Thank you to Bill as well. Okay, so I'm going to read just a tiny bit from Cuyahoga. This is a little snippet about the nature of Big Son, who is the protagonist, sort of, in a way, of the book. He's one of the sort of twin protagonists. He is what's called a spirit of the times, something like the 1830s equivalent of a superhero. And if you are comic book fans, maybe you know Speeding Than a Faster Bullet, Leaping Skyscrapers in a Single Bound, that kind of epithet for Superman. You're about to get Big Son's version of that. My brother were democratic in his feats. He'd done them in 100 different patterns like calico. Big. He is mostly called Big. Wrestled bears and every other creature 10 at a time. He drank a barrel of whiskey and belched fire. Hung church bells one-handed. Hunted 100 rabbits in a day. Ate 1,000 pancakes and asked for seconds. Drained swamps and cut roads, etc. More feats than I've got numbers to count up. I thrilled most at his brawling with the world itself, at his domesticating Lake Erie and several rivers besides, at his strength turned against soil and stone. There is nothing like the making of a place. To bust up creation, to write your name in the very earth. My brother was a professor of such work. You have heard of Daniel Boone, Colonel Crockett, Mike Fink, and other American Herculeses. My brother shown the same appetites. You ask, why is this Big Son not the hero of every child? What feats of his do I know? And the book goes on to tell you some of those feats. I sort of consistently feel like I got away with something because I got to write this weird book. It sort of defies description. But I know Kathy sort of has some program notes teed up for where we should go to try to tell you guys a little bit about it.
Okay, so all right, I'm going to ask you to read a little bit more of the prologue. It's a prologue of sorts that launches the book, and then I'll ask you about that.
Okay, so this is to give you the sort of mise en scène here, this is like medium sun. Like, imagine you're like rehearsing your story. You're trying to get your story straight in the mirror before you go talk to somebody, right? I often think of William H. Macy's character in Fargo, sort of getting into the headspace of the crazy lie he's going to tell about how his wife died. Stories will go to rot without putting up. You must salt them into Egyptian mummies or drown them in lying sugar, bury them in winter and freeze their blood. But you would hide the honest stink, the mosquito bites, the wounds, the living glory. Let you and me do without salt and sugar, and taste matters true, even if the truth is half rotten.
Okay, so I have characterized Cuyahoga as a wild ride. You heard what some of the critics have said. This is a novel set in 1830s Ohio, and it begins and ends with fire. There are night pigs, which are just day pigs who go out at night. Whiskey barrels, bridges are built and blown up. You have said, Pete, that some of your narrative influences were Looney Tunes cartoons, Greek myths, the Bible, Coen Brothers films. What was the germ of the narrative that first set you on this path? And what are you telling the reader about the narrative with this short prologue?
It's I think there's this concept of like spontaneous innovation or whatever, where some other guy also invented the telephone at the same time as Alexander Graham Bell, but he doesn't get any credit for it because he forgot to sort of, he wasn't as good at branding as Alexander Graham Bell. And I think a lot of the germs of the ideas for the book did really just start with little disparate incidences. What would a superhero look like in 1837? What would a superhero look like in 1837 Cleveland? Some of it is really almost like, I think of it as like karaoke, of like taking some moment from a work of art that always kind of popped for me. And one of the things, the literary character that I relate to more than any other is probably Wile E. Coyote. So to try to take that thing where his hopes and dreams are invested in, Acme Corporation products and frequently exploding and leaving him singed. And then, the next frame, he's back, he's himself again. And I wanted to get some of that sort of manic, illogical energy into something to sort of squeeze that into what is, a literary novel, I guess. I hate that. I don't like that word. It makes it sound like you're not supposed to have fun while you're reading it. And that is not, if you're not having fun while you're reading this book, you're doing it wrong. But the real germ of the narrative, the actual thing that got me started, was an event in the history of Cleveland called the Bridge War, where the towns on the two sides of the river got into an argument about where to put the bridge. And it's one of those things where from the outside, from 180 years later, removed from the day-to-day concerns of life in the late 1830s, it makes absolutely no sense. They should have just built a bridge and then another bridge and it would have been fine. But, the sort of the narcissism of small differences or whatever seemed to get them into a sort of a rage. And they wound up having a pitched battle over this, the bridge at Columbus, what is now the bridge at Columbus Road, but what was then Columbus Road is now Columbus Street in the flats in downtown Cleveland. There's still a bridge there. It's much as a new bridge. But there was shoving and attempted bombings and fighting, and a cow got killed and somebody got stabbed. They survived. A peanut stand was destroyed in one of the explosions. And it just has always been a mystery to me as long as I've known about it. And that's where the story started. I sort of built out from that real moment. It's a very specific answer to the question.
Sorry, I'm going to stop muting myself because I can't unmute myself. So I wondered if you would talk about the origins of your interest in history, and maybe local history in particular.
I think that's definitely my dad, Tim Beatty, who's probably out in the virtual audience there. Take a bow, Tames. Is a history teacher. He was actually my 8th grade history teacher, and we had an unfinished basement at the house we lived in at 221 Best Street in the suburbs, and it was full of his old history books. And my number one priority for a big chunk of my childhood, as soon as I got a handle on the strange markings on paper meant, was to go down there in the cool, like cement floor and just read my dad's history books, his books from his graduate work, the stuff he'd used for teaching. And that's just always been with me. We used to literally on Saturday afternoons, we would play like trivia, me, my dad, and my sister, and just, sort of quiz each other about history. So it's just something that's like, it's a love language for me, I think, is obscure information about the past.
Love that. So like, does this interest focus more tightly around Cleveland? So this is a novel set in Cleveland. You're from the Cleveland area. What does Cleveland mean to you? And like this event is taking place in Oxford, Mississippi. Some
Yes.
people are in Oxford, which is the home of William Faulkner, who he is certainly a writer of place. Do you imagine you will be a writer of place? Do you think Cleveland will continue to occupy your work?
I think I'm going to take a break from Cleveland just because I feel a little bit like I'm, a little carpetbagging, reverse carpetbagging, actually. I'm coming up from the South to the Rust Belt to hijack their culture to make money. But Cleveland as a place is really interesting and beautiful and fascinating. It's much more complicated and rich and weird and messed up than I could even put down in a crazy sort of wildly fictionalized, goofy, fantastic novel. It's a place that grew so fast and has been sort of buffeted by huge historical forces in ways that are kind of hard to fathom. So I think I was sort of going for what it's one of the Beat poets. I think Getty talks about like the Coney Island of the mind. Is that I was trying to create a Cleveland of the mind, and like a lot of people who grew up in the suburbs, I think I felt like, this place sucks. Life here sucks. I got to get out of here. And it didn't take all that long after leaving and growing up a little bit and having my hormones settle down to realize that actually like the place where I came from is really interesting and cool. It's just I suck. I was terrible. And so I've been on this kind of like backwards voyage of learning about the place where I grew up kind of almost ever since I left it. Yeah, and Cleveland's just cool. Cleveland doesn't get enough love. It's just like if you scratch American history, you will find a contribution from Northeast Ohio lurking everywhere, under every stone.
I'm a new Cleveland fan myself, 2 recent trips there, and a child going to school in Ohio. So I guess I'd like to consider myself an honorary Buckeye. But
Yeah.
all right, the novel's narrated by Meade, who is Big's younger brother. So Meade has control of the story and thereby control of his brother's story. Within the Meade narration, he talks about an almanac he wrote about Big, because that's what he and his family decided should happen in order for Big to get some money, because all he could manage was adoration. But the book itself is not the almanac. So I'm curious if you ever thought about writing the book as the almanac, so a book within the book, and if not, why didn't you, and what work did you need Meade to do? Did you need Meade to do for the story you wanted to write?
That is a good question. I think it really is. There are places where I think, having looked back at it, I would totally forgive a reader or an editor for saying like, oh God, it's gonna be a book within a book. And not to, I think that's been done pretty well. And you know, one of the things I often told myself, you know, whenever I think there's a big movement towards kind of what you know you hear called autofiction, and not just in books, of sort of lightly fictionalizing your own life to in the service of sort of creating something, and it's not my bag. The thing is, like, all fiction is autofiction, really. I never like to define myself by negatives, but I'm going to do it here, which is just like, I could literally make up anything I wanted in this book. So if I wound up writing a book about a writer, like, I should just save it for therapy, you know?
Thank you, Pete.
Yeah.
Yes, we've read some of those novels, and I love them all. I love them.
They're all fantastic. I'm very happy for everybody.
So a lot of the book is occupied by these lunatic male characters, but the LA Times review actually said it's the great man spirit of manifest destiny that sort of occupies the book. But there are great women characters in here too. Miss Chloe, who is big and needs love interest and kind of sister, has a strong presence. Mrs. Tabitha Stiles, who is big and needs sort of adoptive mother, is unforgettable, and especially the way she chases after people with food. You at one point described this book in these very loose terms, that it was a novel about white guys coming in, stomping around, and messing things up. So what role do the women play here?
A very important one. I mean, Chloe is a character who has honestly been more vivid and more exciting and more interesting to me the whole time. Obviously, Mead and Big get sort of the screen time by minutes, by virtue of their position as characters and the centrality of their relationship. But I wanted Chloe to make some very important, very subtle points, which basically was, you know, I kind of reach for I put my wallet in my front pocket whenever somebody describes himself as a male feminist. So I will not describe myself as a male feminist, but I wanted, it's so, there are certain structures and ways of looking and seeing, and it's just it's, you know, the male gaze that Laura Mulvey famously wrote about. Sort of, women can only be understood through their desirability to heterosexual male characters. So I wanted Chloe to be this kind of very charismatic, appealing, completely uncooperative character who at every turn, I think in every scene where Chloe shows up, she says she's not interested in doing something. She's assaulting someone who you know who makes an overly enthusiastic offer of marriage. She's smoking, you know, cussing, and I didn't want her to be sort of this, you know, manic pixie dream girl trope. I wanted her to actually just be this person who's like too cool for us, like literally too cool for everyone else in the story, as kind of it's just like I'm a straight white guy, and it's not, that doesn't mean I can't write female characters, but I do think I didn't want to make like sort of pat, like stale girl boss tropes out of the female character who kind of meant something to me. I don't know. It's a tricky question to answer, but it's one I really like to hear, because I'm constantly I guess I'm just preoccupied with whether I did a good job or not with the Chloe character. Miss Tab is just really fun. She is like a true cartoon character who's like sort of always who has never smiled in her life and is sort of constantly assaulting people with food, not so much to feed them as much as to shut them up very often.
Yes, it's a very an aggressive form of love.
Yes.
So as everyone heard when you were reading, Mead's narration is very fresh and original, which was my sense when I first read it, but it also had this feeling like home. And the Columbus Dispatch says, I'm actually not a fan of Thomas Pynchon, but they said that he takes a cue from Pynchon's masterly Mason and Dixon, because Pynchon's a little short on heart, in my opinion. So I wonder how you cultivated this voice and what inspired it, because you have a crazy good ear.
So, full disclosure, I have never finished a Thomas Pynchon book. In fact, I don't think I've read more than 50 pages of one of them. He seems awesome. Like I have no, well, no, I guess I don't think he seems awesome. He lacks heart, but he's doing his thing. Like pyrotechnic, sort of, postmodern virtuosity is cool. I mean, it's like, we're the loudest band in the world. Like, congratulations. Anyway, I'm gonna stop bad mouthing Thomas Pynchon, various other people. The way that I tuned the voice into my head was honestly just kind of like, one, I love and adore Huck Finn. It's one of my favorite books, and it is probably, with The Great Gatsby, a book that I've read it cover to cover 10 times. So it's just like, it is boned in, as a carpenter would say, sort of into the grain of my language. I also love Moby Dick, which has very sort of orotund 19th century syntax and diction, and just sort of like this perfect ability to drop just like 10% too much word at the exact right time. Never too much. Those were big. And then the real, I think, kind of the wellspring of all of this, and both those books and a million others, is the King James Bible. Is the sort of that version of the Bible, which should really be called the William Tyndale Bible, but I'll save that Bible studies fight for later. The sending shots at King James and Thomas Pynchon and other people. It's wild. It's 5:30 in Tuscaloosa. That was the wellspring, and in fact, I've said this a few other places, so I'm going to plagiarize myself. I have the audiobook of Johnny Cash reading the New Testament, and that was my bedtime story for a lot of the time while I was writing the book. And just hearing, even though that was not the King James Bible, it was the New Revised Version. I can't stop with the Bible details. It was still a lot of the same language, and just getting into that rhythm, that kind of, it's really like these patterns that are like inscribed over and over again, where you have something that's originating in the Old Testament, is then echoing in the New Testament into Greek of the New Testament, and is then translated into kind of Elizabethan English, and then read by Johnny Cash. So you sort of get this crazy marbled, patinaed, like just miraculous language. And so, yeah, I just took it, just hung out with that stuff for a long time until I started talking like that. Basically, my interior monologue basically just was in 1837 for a couple of years.
You said something very shocking just now. He didn't read the King James Version?
It's the
Wow.
New Standard Version.
Jeez.
The actual King James Version it has a little bit of Shakespeare effect, where the things that are off are just off enough that it throws you. So it's not great for sort of recitation always.
A few too many curly cues. All right. Yep. So now in your author questionnaire, so we send author questionnaires out to all the writers before they're published, and they download like their bio and when they were born. And anyway, some fantastic thing came out of Pete's, as comes out of almost everything. He described the breadsticks from Olive Garden in a way that I found both profound and moving. So apparently, after winning an Olive Garden sponsored writing contest, Pete and his family got a free dinner. And as he says in the questionnaire, the unlimited breadsticks at Olive Garden were a prime manifestation to my 12-year-old self of the promise and peril of America. Winning the contest was the first time I understood that writing could bring into closer communion the vital energies of this great and awful nation. How has Cuyahoga built on that early feeling about the vital energies of this great and awful nation?
You know, it's like, first of all, let's shout out to the Olive Garden on Bagley Road at I-71, conveniently located by the several hotels by the airport. Hope they're still hanging in there. I don't know how COVID treated them. You know, I can think of a sort of a little kind of like personal highlight reel of disillusionments. Like I got a hard confirmation Santa Claus wasn't real when I saw the box from a Christmas toy in like broken down for like the recycling in our garage when I was a kid. And it's like, Santa Claus wouldn't leave that here. Like, this is bullshit. You know, one of the older kids at school told me that pro wrestling wasn't real. And, you know, I thought about it and I kind of turned the question over and I was like, shit, it's not real. Hulk Hogan always almost loses and then gets up after like a count of two, kicks his leg on, and then he beats the guy. It always happens. Hulk Hogan always wins. And writing, particularly kind of that like that sort of writing that like lights you up when you read it, feels like, can feel in a way like this kind of beautiful disillusionment when you see something in a new light. It could be reframed in a beautiful way or a terrible way. That's what kind of like those, you know, like I think it's the thin, wild Mercury sound or whatever. Like when that happens in writing, it's really kind of, it's a pearl beyond price for me. And I think a lot of the fiction that I love and a lot of the history writing that I love, like one book just totally popping into my mind because I saw it on the shelf the other day, is Son of the Morning Star by Evan Connell, which is superficially like supposed to just be a book about Custer's last stand, but it's actually like this beautiful, completely insane indictment of all of the idiocies of white America. And it's wrapped up in military history, and it's soulful and weird, and I think just one of those books that I'm glad that I accidentally read, because otherwise I wouldn't know that the stuff was there. So I may have forgotten where this question started, but in conclusion, America is a land of contrasts. And no, I mean, just like sort of speaking of the disillusionment, like realizing that like, I realized Santa Claus wasn't real, but I did not, you know, tell my parents to take the toy back. I realized that pro wrestling was fake, but I didn't stop watching. And reading stuff like that made me realize like America is sick. It's a screwed up, sick fever dream. But I live here. So we gotta like, think about it and talk about it and like get weird in order to not go crazy to not just start believing our own lies completely, because I think there's some pretty obvious reflections of how that goes for you as a human being. I'm not going to name any names.
Yes, thank you for indulging my Olive Garden question. I really wanted to ask you that one. And I just wanted to say to Tim and Lori, I made the wrapping paper mistake. So you are not alone in destroying your child's Christmas. Okay. All right. Shifting.
Well, we got about 10 more minutes, guys.
Okay.
So we did have one question. Kathy, if we don't have any more, jump back in. But this is a burning question from someone from the audience. And it says, hey, Pete, what's your favorite part of Moby Dick?
I'm gonna guess this is from Julia Corsi is my guess. Hi, Julia. Hi, either way, if it's not your question. My favorite part of Moby Dick 2, the quarterdeck, where Ahab sort of nails the doubloon or the piece of eight to the mast and lays down in one of his like great soliloquies, like truly insane stuff about like, is it God or Ahab who moves this arm? Is Ahab Ahab? That one's good. Whiteness of the Whale, that's the popular answer. That's the crowd pleaser. But mine is when Starbuck is in the hallway thinking about killing Captain Ahab and talking to himself. That's my favorite from the second half of the book.
I like it. And then another one about research, since it's a historical novel set in the 1830s. I mean, how much did you immerse yourself? Have you left the 1830s yet? Were you doing anything crazy while you were doing the research? I mean, I have an author friend of mine, when I went over to his house, he was in the backyard boiling down a deer carcass to see if somebody might be able to actually, get rid of human bones that way. So, I mean, how much of a deep dive was it? And
it was, I kept it, I didn't like immerse myself in like period drugs or, textiles or whatever, but I did read, thanks to my dad, who formerly worked at the Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland. He actually helped me get into their newspaper collection and read all of the sort of newspapers from Cleveland in the 1830s and a few from other places. And that just was like huge for getting a sense of like what the actual preoccupations of people were, what they were buying, what they were selling, what they were arguing with each other about. And the other thing was, I got like one of the great things in the world, speaking of the King James Bible, one of the great sort of literary endeavors of all time is the Oxford English Dictionary. And the Oxford English Dictionary is like the greatest thing in the history of the world if you're writing a novel set in a specific point in time and you want to find out if the language in that book is period appropriate. So I spent hours and hours, to the point where I actually had to switch. I ripped the Wi-Fi card out of my laptop so I could write without distraction, because otherwise I would just like crawl inside the OED and look at etymologies. But no drugs, no like I did not try creosote, the 1830s dental, dentifrice. I didn't brew my own whiskey or anything. I kept it cute.
Kathy, you got anything else you want to discuss? We got a few more minutes here.
Yeah, I had one question that since Pete and I met as editors, so Pete and Toni Morrison have some things in common, which, I like to set up most questions that way. They're both from Ohio. They both published their first novels at the age of 39, and they both have made their living as editors. So how does the work of being an editor impact your writing, Pete?
Well, Toni Morrison's a lot cooler than me. Better hair. She also wrote like 12 amazing books, and I'm at like one book that is fine. I think one of the things that I learned from being an editor is like, ultimately you can only kind of point people in the right direction. Like if a book is going to be good, it kind of has to be, there are different kinds of books. Nonfiction, I think, is maybe a little bit different, where it can be driven by like research or a sort of like a more external thing. But for fiction, which I didn't edit actually, it's like you kind of just have to like keep the writer from going off the course and just kind of point them towards this thing. And then maybe there's a moment where the writer sort of loses their ability to differentiate, to know when it's good, to know like what the really good stuff is from just like the almost there stuff. And that's where the editor can kind of swoop in and say like, that, you're doing it. One thing I will say is that I love editing. I love working with people to help them express the ideas that they're trying to get down. And it's a very social thing. It's something that involves like establishing trust and sort of learning each other's language, and like it's a dance, you know. And I found writing to be much more of just like a blind faith thing. So I don't know. I think as I get older, I'm just like too grouchy to do anything other than exactly what I want to do, which may have always been the case, and I was just fronting. So hopefully it can write another book, and like, you know, they can just kind of put me off in my little separate. I'm a biter, you know, and they can put me in the cage for biters. And I can get some steam out and come back and act normal for part of the day.
I was always relieved that my child was bitten.
Let's see,
Not the biter. But that
got
might.
one more from the audience here. It says, is it true that Cuyahoga is an American Indian word for crooked? Would that have double meaning for the book, or is it strictly based on the river's name or the REM song?
Yes, yes, and yes. The actual like Native American Indian etymology of Cuyahoga could be crooked river. It could just be like sort of like pleasant water. There's a couple of different, but it seems to have something to do with water. But I did want to play off its the fact that it, you know, caught on fire a whole bunch of times and is kind of the emblem of how badly we've abused this continent. And the REM song slaps. That is still, it just goes. That song rules. So I wanted to get that in there. And honestly, just like 100% real. The title I had stunk, and this popped into my head one day, and I was like, that works.
Happy circumstances.
Yep.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have. We've got signed copies of this wonderful book. I think everybody's going to be just bowled over by this for the rest of the season. I hope everybody gets a chance to read it. I want to thank Pete and congratulate you, and special thanks to Kathy. You're so gracious to do this for us, and we miss you, and have a good rest of your vacation.
Thank you.
And anybody that wants to see this, it'll be recorded and up on our website, on our YouTube channel. And thanks so much for attending, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.